Grüß, willkommen in einem anderen Aufregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 5 of my Star Trek The Original Series Timeline Analysis series of videos. In this video I'll discuss the supermen and superwomen of the Eugenics War. The first point to make clear is these supermen and women of the Eugenics War are nothing to do with the genetically altered humans from the Enterprise episode The Augments. In this case, Dr. Nguyen Song, well after the Eugenics War, decided to genetically alter humans. I'm only raising this because I myself was confused and made some assumptions about the supermen and women of the Eugenics War, which was incorrect. It appears there was no genetic engineering utilised in creating the supermen and women of the Eugenics War. Let's look at the evidence to confirm if this is correct, and if not, what the real situation is. Eugenics is the theory that humans can be improved through selective breedings of populations. On the other hand, genetic engineering is an idea or concept that was not very common in the late 1960s. The first recombinant DNA molecule was made by Paul Berg in 1972 by combining DNA from the monkey virus, SV40, with the lambda virus. The term genetic engineering was coined by the Russian-born geneticist Nikolai Timofeyevich Verevsky in the 1934 paper The Experimental Production of Mutations, published in the British journal Biological Reviews. So in the world of science fiction books, the term genetic engineering may well have been used and is a viable concept to consider, but no mention of genetic engineering exists in the Star Trek, the original series scripts. It's likely this idea was not considered when Star Trek was being written in the 1960s. I must admit Kirk uses the term controlled genetics, but this is not engineering, that is genetic engineering, only controlled or most likely breeding-based modification of genes. The only episode in the original series which mentions the Eugenics War is the episode Space Seed, Season 1, Episode 22, and the 24th episode produced. In simple terms, when Star Trek the original series was written, eugenics was considered to be about selective breeding, not genetic engineering. This is mentioned in Plato's Stepchildren and The Conscience of the King, although the method was not described explicitly. In those cases, this had nothing to do with the supermen and women of the Eugenics War. When we move to the animated series, the Eugenics War is also mentioned in an episode there, specifically the episode The Infinite Vulcan, which is the 7th episode of the animated series and the 82nd overall episode produced. Stavros Keniklis, a survivor of the Eugenics War, brought a disease to the inhabitants of an alien planet called Pylos. We're not going to discuss that in any particular detail, but in this episode we discovered Keniklis clones himself and is up to the 5th clone. According to this episode, Keniklis is over 250 years old, which means he was born in 2117 AD, which is most likely incorrect. This is obviously wrong, as the Eugenics War occurred about 270 years ago, so Stavros Keniklis must be closer to 300 years old. Again, not that particularly important. However, I must admit, McCoy did say over 250 years, so 300 is over 250 years. We further discover in this episode that Stavros Keniklis was looking for a perfect specimen to clone. He was not conducting genetic engineering to create a perfect specimen. He was looking for a perfect specimen to clone. This is the clue to the supermen and women of the Eugenics War. Going back to the original series, in the episode The Space Seed, Spock describes the supermen and women as a result of selective breeding. Spock specifically says, "Your attempt to improve the race through selective breeding." This selective breeding effort must have been rather intense and extensive, and was worked on by a number of scientists. As Khan was an adult when he left Earth, the selective breeding research must have been conducted for more than 30 years, if not much more. It's possible Stavros Keniklis was one of those scientists, but even if not, his approach may be copying the original line of research that those original scientists were following. The approach seems to be find a so-called perfect specimen and then breed them with each other to enhance those benefits, whatever they may happen to be. We do discover in this episode the Supermen are physically stronger and their biological functions are 50% to twice that of a normal human. It's also estimated their brain power matches this 50% to 100% enhancement. Although as Khan is defeated by Kirk, it can't be superhuman intelligent, and perhaps, he didn't actually get that much additional intelligence. It was all about physical benefits. In order to achieve such impressive improvements, we must be talking about several generations of careful breeding. The issue we have is Khan must have been born around 1962, perhaps 1969, which seems to be the universal start year for many things in Star Trek. This makes him young, but certainly not impossibly young, and it's viable. While I can't be certain, Khan seems to have been the first Superman, or at least one of the first. The next question is, where could have the scientists be based to do their research? One theory is that they were based in India. However, as India only became independent in 1947, this barely gives us a maximum of 2 generations to achieve our Supermen or women. This is still a viable possibility, but not as likely as my next most recent theory. The name Stavros Kanikolis sounds like he may be from Greece. It's the only name of one of the scientists that we have. However, I must admit that the research is unlikely to have occurred in Greece, so let's put that to one side. The other issue that we have is McCoy says a group of scientists, not generations of scientists. If the first batch of supermen and women were born in the late 1960s, and if the scientists were as old as, let's say, 50 to 60 when this occurred, then if they started when they were, let's say, 30 years of age, then their work would have begun in the 1930s or 1940s. This year does seem rather close to another major experiment in eugenics, but could it be the source of the scientists nonetheless? Even Stavros could have been a Greek scientist which got caught up in the Third Reich's eugenic experiments in the late 30s or early 40s. This does mean the science behind the supermen and women may have come from a rather dark place. If this theory is correct, then the scientists could have escaped in a U-boat with their research and a number of specimens, perhaps a few unusually superior children or adults saved from the hell that was National Socialist research. South America is the default location for these type of escapes and is as good as any other place I can think of for the research to have been continued. I must admit this was not my original theory. I originally thought the scientists did their work in India. If we're talking about selective breeding, we may not have enough time to make any meaningful improvements to a human if it started in India in 1947. The National Socialist eugenics research, or even prior to the National Socialists, would have been a better bedrock for this work, as they would have had a huge number of people to test and to find a few unusually superior children or adults as a result. These children or adults, that is superior children and adults, would have generated a second generation of further improved humans, which would have then been the bedrock of the supermen and women of the Eugenics War. My guess is these scientists offered the various leaders and dictators of the Third World superior female eggs, which they could artificially fertilize with their own sperm and implant into a woman. This would have given birth to Khan and the other supermen and women in what I think is the Third World. I have to admit I'm making a lot of assumptions here, mainly because if you were a dictator in a South American or African nation, you probably would have wanted children which was related to you. It's possible this was not required and that you could just simply pick up a fully fertilized superior person, but based on human nature, I don't think that would be likely. At the very least, the dictator would have wanted the child to at least look roughly similar to him or herself. If the superior children came from Europe, then, it doesn't make a good match for, let's say, Indians or South Americans or Africans. So I'm sticking with we're offering you a superior egg theory and you fertilize with your own sperm and it's your child, but it's a superior child theory. Another fact which supports this is we know Khan was a Sikh, so he could not have been purely the result of eugenics research based out of Europe. although he could have been the result of that sort of research out of, let's say, India. A Sikh must have been used as a parent in this case, and the superior female egg or sperm, the other parent. I mean, obviously, if the dictator was a woman, then the woman would probably want a sperm, but most of them would have been men that wanted female eggs. Perhaps the fertilization was actually natural, and someone in India mated with the superior female human. If the leader of India was a Sikh, then he would have used his sperm with the superior female egg and created Khan, in theory. I have no idea if this is the most likely scenario. There are lots of different possible theories possible, but we do know the outcome, and this theory seems to allow that outcome to outcome, basically. Let's look at the numbers at this moment. The sleeper ship had a total of 84 humans, with 12 not surviving, leaving us with 72 survivors, 30 of which were women. Could this represent the total population of all the supermen and women? While it's possible, it's very unlikely. There were more than 40 countries. If each had a pair of superwomen or men, and add a couple of extra for India or spares, it's likely there may have been a total of, let's say, up to a minimum of 100 supermen and women. 84 managed to get away and 72 survived. This is likely the minimum number, and if fertilization was natural, represents a reasonable maximum number as well. I suspect the number was actually greater, probably double this. This is only a gut feel, but whatever the actual number was, it was certainly not in the thousands. We're not talking about huge armies of supermen and women that try and sweep over the world. We're talking about a comparatively small number of naturally bred supermen and women which ran the places. So, in conclusion, the supermen and women of the Eugenics War were likely the result of intensive selective breeding, likely begun in the 1930s and 40s in the Third Reich, and then moved to South America, where they gave birth to about 100 to 200 super babies, which ended up in over 40 countries in the Third World and took over their respective countries, even voluntarily by their parents or involuntarily. I must admit, this is not a really likely scenario, but it's the best one I can come up with which fits the facts as presented in the original series script. And so we come to an end of episode 5 of my Star Trek The Original Series Timeline Analysis, in this case covering the supermen and superwomen of the Eugenics War. The episode scripts can be found in the URLs shown. Alle guten Dingen kommen zu einem Ende.